Hi, and welcome to today's Engaging for Missouri webinar. I'm Alice Roach from the University of Missouri, and I will be your host today. With each of these 30-minute presentations, we intend to share research-based insights that leaders like you can apply in your own work to benefit and strengthen the state's agriculture and food system, hospitality sector, economy, communities, and families. Today, Andrew Zumwalt will share a presentation focused on inflation and personal finances. Before we begin, I want to share a few housekeeping items. First, we'll close today with a Q&A session. Those of you who have connected today via your computers may submit any questions you have in the chat screen. If you joined today by phone, then you may email me your questions at roacham@missouri.edu. Second, all attendees are muted and may not start their video. Third, if you encounter any technical problems during today's presentation, then you can let me know by either submitting a comment in the chat screen, or you can send me an email at roacham@missouri.edu, and I'll do my best to help you troubleshoot. And last, we will make a recording of today's presentation available. You can look for an email sometime tomorrow that shares more about where you can access that recording. And you can also find an archive of previous webinars on our Division of Applied Social Sciences YouTube channel. So with that, we'll transition to the topic of today's presentation, which is titled Non-Transitory Inflation, a Conversation on Adjusting Personal Finances for Persistent Inflation. Presenting today is Andrew Zumwalt, who's an associate professor of personal financial planning at Mizzou. So thanks, Andrew, for presenting today. If you could please unmute your microphone and start your video, then we can begin today's presentation.
Well, good morning, everybody. Glad to be here. Relatively new to DAS and CAFNR, but excited to be here with you all talking about personal finance and kind of using our crystal ball a little bit to kind of look at the future. So whenever I have a presentation, especially when the first time I'm addressing an audience, I always like to answer the question, who is this person? And so Alice introduced me as an associate teaching professor in that personal financial planning program. I do have my CFP as well, so I am a certified financial planner, which means I had to take several college courses, pass at the time, a 10-hour exam spread over 2 days, and also have continuing education requirements. So really my focus is on taxation and kind of the broad personal financial planning view. And I've also got a history of extension. So I spent 16 years with extension before moving to DAS this summer. And so, as they say, one does not simply leave extension, so I'm excited to still do some engagement and outreach opportunities. And so our agenda today, we've got about 20 minutes and then some time at the end for Q&A. Want to have a little disclaimer because I am a certified financial planner. Talk a little bit about the background, what's going on in the world. Let's look at inflation and some other trends, and then finally look at some financial strategies for the next 12 months. So first, a disclaimer, I'm doing this presentation. I don't really know who you are, the viewer, yet. We'll kind of figure that out in the Q&A, but this is not a client engagement as defined by the CFP Board of Standards. So you are not my client. I am not your financial advisor. And that means that I am not giving you any financial advice specific to your situation. So if you go and do something based on the man in the monitor, that's on you. And so if you decide to take some action, I strongly suggest you review that with a financial planner who can look at your entire financial situation and can give you tailored advice. So this is just general financial education, not advice. If you do something and it goes horribly wrong, that is on you. Just had to throw that out there. But let's talk about what's going on in the world. So what is going on? So if we step back, there's quite a bit actually. There's the question is COVID-19 over? We've got some discussion on that. We know that in China, they're pursuing a zero COVID policy, a lot of lockdowns, a lot of measures taken to really restrict the flow of people. So trying to keep COVID from spreading in that country. So while in the US, our lockdowns are kind of over. We've kind of given up on some of those social distancing policies. It still is very much active in other parts of the world. If you've been around the past couple of years, you know that we have supply chain disruptions and they are evolving. And so just recently in the past week or so, the sanctions on semiconductors regarding China came out from the US. And so that has kind of roiled through China and really caused some US personnel working in China on semiconductors to stop. Some of the export controls, really kind of changing the landscape in terms of that technology. And there are some places in the economy among the supply chain where there are overstocks. And so with especially textiles and other kind of discretionary goods, there is actually too much of those things around, whereas with some of our items, we are still low. And so these supply chain disruptions vary depending on what goods we're looking at. We've got a war in Ukraine with Russia, and it seems like we always have just kind of on the horizon, maybe nuclear possibilities there. And so if you go out to some of the prediction markets, I believe a couple of weeks ago, the prediction market was, and that's a group of individuals who come together and forecast events, maybe a 10% probability that there would be a nuclear event happening around the world. So that's quite a lot, 10%. And so still got this possibility hanging around. Europe is facing energy scarcity. Russia has kind of turned off the gas taps. And so natural gas isn't flowing to Europe, especially Germany and other places like it used to. And so they're trying to import a lot of liquefied natural gas and searching for other solutions. We've got natural disasters. Hurricane Ian just kind of rolled through Florida, but we also have some of the smaller ones throughout the country. UK budget issues came up last week as well. And so they've kind of, Liz Truss's new government had some ambitious changes to their tax policies and other items, kind of recoiled on her. The Treasury leader over there is out, had to replace them. So really kind of roiling in those markets, but it's not all bad. In the US, we've got low unemployment. We've got definitely a strong economy. Things look not too bad if we can ignore some of that inflation on an everyday standpoint. So that's just a little bit of the background. We're going to take a look at some graphs. Now, graphs are interesting, but I'm not going to spend too much time looking at graphs, but the graphs come with interpretations. And so just a warning, I really love reading economists' takes and especially listening to them on podcasts. I'm going to defer to them, and I'm not going to call myself an economist, but I believe I've put together a little narrative to kind of explain what's going on. And so a shout out to the St. Louis Federal Reserve for making available their kind of database of information. And it's so easy to create graphs and compare and contrast with past time periods. But again, this is just kind of one view of what's happening in our economy. So as you know, if you've bought something recently, inflation is still pretty high. We're relatively high if you look at the past decade. So definitely kind of reaching that 8 or 9%. And I use the median consumer price index here. It's not as maybe popular as some of the other indices, but there is a little bit of research that says this might be more targeted, provides a better view of inflation. But if we take it back, let's say 30 years, you can see that we're really dealing with some unprecedented level of inflation. So going back just 30 years to the early 90s, we haven't seen 7, 8, or 9 for quite some time. Now, I know if I pulled this out into the 80s, we'd get a different picture there, but still 30 years is quite a long time, and our memories can only go back so far. We've got several generations that haven't experienced inflation at this level. So that's really what we're trying to show here. And anecdotally, you've probably got some stories about inflation. So I was buying butter this weekend. Butter was $4.50 a pound. I can remember when it was $3 and when it was even cheaper. Eggs, just checking it, it was $3 for 18. And so $2 a dozen, which seems actually a little bit lower than maybe what it's been recently. I love to follow chicken breasts. Chicken breasts were, I believe it was $2.99 for boneless, skinless. And again, I can remember when it was $1.70, kind of pre-pandemic, $1.80 or so. And so cars especially have gone up. We've got many stories of dealers who are selling over MSRP, which some of the car manufacturers are not happy with because they're worried about the negative feelings that customers have about that experience of paying more than the sticker price. And then I recently bought tires, which were also above. So anecdotally, we can see that, again, we've definitely got an increase in prices. And so to kind of combat this, the Federal Reserve has been raising the Fed funds rate. And so this graph, you can see we've were coming out with a pretty low rate at the end of the Great Recession, started to kind of pick back up here, and then we started to cut a little bit, and then the pandemic hit, and we cut it all the way pretty much down to zero, and now we've been quickly making up time, and this graph only went through September, but we're actually at 3%, a shade over 3% as of the 14th. So quite a dramatic increase in our Federal Reserve, and that has had an impact on mortgages. So we've got our 30-year fixed rate mortgage here. Again, just going back to 2010 to the present. So you can see we've got, we've been kind of steady here at around 5%, between 3 and 5 roughly, and now we've spiked up to 7. Some of the data actually is on a lag, and so if you talk to bankers, they're already quoting 7% as the average, whereas some of the stats are saying it's still a little bit below 7. And if we take that further out, the past 10 years, it looks pretty high, but historically, it's not too high. And so if we go back to in the 2000s here, even right before the Great Recession, we had rates somewhat close to that 7%. And of course, if we go back into the 80s, we're nowhere near the almost 18 or more percent on mortgages. So we're not clearly near the, we're high compared to the past decade or so, but we're not near the kind of large highs that we had 40 years ago. So what is the impact of these rates with high mortgage rates and also increasing auto rates? What's the impact on purchasing? Well, with new car inventories, we're at a 42-day supply, which is the highest it's been since June of 2021. So manufacturers are catching up. The supply chains are kind of easing a little bit. And so that's actually 500,000 more cars than last year, if we look at the same month, and 90,000 more than last month. So we're actually doing pretty well. But if we go back to 2019, 2 million less. So we're still in a shortage of new cars, but it is getting better. And that's from Automotive News. Housing inventory, if we look at it, has reacted even more quickly to these rising rates. And so we actually had, I believe for a brief time in August, a 10-month supply of new homes. It's kind of dipped back down to 8, but that is still quite a spike compared to the recent past. And if we go back even further, we see some maybe unsettling trends. And so when we have a spike in our supply of new homes, so we've got here, this is the kind of the Great Recession. We've got another one here in the early 90s, and then going back kind of into the 80s and 70s. Whenever there's a spike, there's been a recession. And so kind of bodes for, the question, is there a recession incoming? And so again, if we look to some of the leaders in the financial space, Jamie Dimon is not one to keep quiet. And so recently he was asked, what's the possibility of a recession? He said the US economy was actually still doing well, but negative factors are likely to put the US in some kind of recession 6 to 9 months from now. And so it seems like the Federal Reserve's raising of interest rates has really clamped down on some of the economic growth, and we're starting to see the brakes being applied. And over the past week, over the past months, more and more people are suggesting that we are likely going into a recession. It's not likely going to be a deep recession, but it is going to be a contraction. And so the Wall Street Journal does a survey of economists. And so recently, over half of them said, yeah, we're going to be in a recession in the next 12 months. And so you can see the spike here during 2008. And then we had another spike during the pandemic. proved to be true, and now we are spiking again. And so it seems like the experts all agree we are going into a recession. And I believe the stock market also agrees with that. We are down. If we just look at the 1 year, we are down about 14%. And so we are not flying high at that 35, 36,000 Dow range. We're down about 14%. But if we look back 5 years, we're definitely nowhere near the pandemic lows. I believe this was about 18,000 on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. So we are still above the pandemic low, but we're still 30% up over the past 5 years. So it's not, again, we're not looking at a deep recession here, just a slight contraction. So let's do a quick summary. We've looked at a lot of graphs. I've talked a lot. What's really going on? Short-term outlook, it's a bit negative. We've got this slowdown in purchasing. The Fed has promised to break the inflation cycle. This is Paul Volcker here. It seems he's the one who broke inflation in the 80s by raising the rates so high to kind of cause a recession. And Jerome Powell and the other members of the Fed, they agree with that. It's going to happen. And we're actually starting to see inflation maybe moderate a little bit, but there is going to be some, as I say there, the economy may get a little dented to actually get to that space. Europe is actually seems to be energy secure in the short term. They're likely going to go into recession, or if they're not already there, but common sense is prevailing. So they were going to shut down some of their nuclear reactors, and they said, you know, that's not a good idea right now. We could probably use the electricity from those, and they're working to import more liquefied natural gas. I believe their stockpiles are full for winter, and so short term they're okay. Longer term, they're going to figure that out. China is still reeling from COVID and some other issues. Companies are looking to maybe reshore, bring some of that supply chain back to the US because they saw how dependent they were on one, manufacturing overseas, and then two, actually shipping it. Shipping costs were out. I don't want to say outrageous, but they were astronomical during the recession, and they've actually come back down because of maybe some of the changes to supply chains. And so longer term, things look a little bit brighter. Hopefully we resolve some of these issues, and the dawn is going to be a little bit clearer, a little bit brighter. So what do you do about personal finance strategies? Well, surely with the rise in the Federal Reserve, with the rise in rates, checking and savings accounts have bounced up to match it, right? And unfortunately, I said that with complete sarcasm because that has not been the case. So for our national deposit rates from the FDIC interest checking, it jumped from 0.03% to 0.04%. Dramatic. Well, I know you're saying, Andrew, that's checking. Surely savings must be better, right? Well, here's savings. We went from about 0.06 here to a little bit over 0.2. So again, interest in saving hasn't really bounced. Maybe you're saying, well, maybe the FDIC has a rate cap, and so the FDIC is actually holding rates down. And so if we go out and look at the FDIC, you can see here's their rates, the national deposit rates for different products going all the way up to the 36-month CD. But the national rate caps are all in the 3 to nearly 6% range. And so banks just don't need the money. They're kind of awash in deposits. This has been true for a while. And so they feel no need to aggressively raise those rates. And so if you're getting eaten up by inflation and your savings rates, the rate that you can get on your savings is low, what can you do? And it seems like the one clear solution is to jump into Series I savings bonds. So they are actually composed, the return on those is composed of an inflation adjusted rate and a fixed rate. And the current rate as of October is 9.62%. That's pretty good compared to what you can get on your savings or checking, even at some of the competitive online banks. And so a lot of people have been jumping into I bonds. The website has actually been broken a little bit because so many people are jumping into it. Now that rate of 9.62, that changes every 6 months. And so if you jumped in today, you would get that rate for 6 months, but then it would adjust. And it adjusts every May and October. Projected rate some people are saying is going to be around 6.5, 6.48%. And so it's not going to be, again, 9.62, but it is still going to be higher than what you can get in a demand deposit. It is exempt from state tax, but it is taxable federal income, and it is taxable at redemption or 30 years, unless you use the education loophole, which I'm going to leave for the Q&A if anybody would like to know more. Some of the downsides: you're locked in for 1 year, so you can't redeem these except if there's an official natural disaster. If you hold them for less than 5 years, you're going to lose the last 3 months of interest. You can only redeem them with the U.S. Treasury. You can only buy them from the Treasury. You can invest $10,000 per taxpayer ID number, and you can also put in $5,000 per your tax refund. You can open up trusts and get your business accounts to purchase I-bonds, but that gets a little convoluted, so it's not really as recommended. You have to use the Treasury Direct website, which feels like it's a website from 2005. You literally type in your password with an on-screen keyboard. It's just bad. You are going to pay ordinary income tax on the interest unless you use it for education, and they're not really being pushed by financial advisors because they can't profit from them. There's no way to charge asset under management fees on your I-bonds easily. So another option out there for consumers is to be savvy. Right, retailers misjudged 2022. A lot of them thought that the demand for goods would be there, and people have chose services or travel. And so there is just a large bulge in inventory sitting out there. So you've probably seen markdowns on some items. Some retailers are choosing to pack and hold. That's where let's say they take their winter gear that they had out in February and March, they packed it up, put it away, and now they're starting to bring it back out again for the November, December timeframe, or just send it down the surplus channel, which is like a TJ Maxx or Marshalls, where it's deeply discounted by another retailer to make way in the original retailer for new goods. And so I don't know about you, but I've started to see Halloween sales, and there's definitely a lot of December holiday goods all around in the retail space. Amazon had another Prime Day this year. We're starting to see retailers be more aggressive because they have so much stuff they would like to sell. Autos are still low on inventory, as we kind of mentioned, but 2023 looks interesting as people maybe the demand for autos starts to fall and the manufacturers catch up. Is there going to be some sort of massive misallocation possible? And another example, I saw this the other day, Costco offered a $500 gift card, basically, when you spent $3,000 at Costco.com. And Costco is a low margin retailer. They make it up on volume. They're that warehouse club. So why offer such a large discount? And so I take this as another sign they're clearing out inventory. Maybe they anticipate a future slowdown in sales. And so they're sacrificing some of their future margin to move product now because they know demand's going to start falling. And so just fascinating to see a large retailer make such a large giveaway at this time. And again, it was only open for 2 days. So again, where the warehouse is a little full, trying to clear them out, what's really happening there? So we've seen asset values fall. And I think it's great to revisit the statement, don't do something, just stand there, right? We often see markets falling. We see, you look at your 401k and it looks more like a 201k because it's fallen in value by so much. And so it's important to say, like, if everything is still in your financial plan and you're still feeling somewhat comfortable, you don't have to do anything. Right, getting some diversification across your industries, being well diversified should protect you from a lot of these falls in asset values. And again, if there's no need for your funds within 5 years, maybe really sit back, right? Don't be hasty to do something. Revisit the plan and say, hey, is this plan still viable? What's going to happen? Maybe it's time to rebalance. And so when you rebalance, you sell high and buy low. That's really what we're supposed to be doing. And maybe if you need to do something, maybe move some cash to those higher yields. So look at those I-bonds. Look at if your bank is paying you nothing or close to nothing, maybe you look at an online bank or another provider which is offering more attractive rates. And I've got up here, these are the stock symbols for some total market indices. You don't need to have many different mutual funds to get diversification. You just need to be broadly invested. Warren Buffett has some great quotes. Be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful. Definitely feels like we're moving into a time when others are fearful. So now's the time to be investing. Be a little bit greedy if you've got some cash on the side that you haven't deployed. It doesn't feel like another 2008. People are comparing it to 2008, and no one seems to be believing that our financial system is close to imploding, right? So the second quote here, only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked. It really feels like the financial system is more secure. And so it's not going to be the dramatic Great Recession that we experienced about a decade ago. So quick recap, the Fed will tame inflation. So it seems they might raise rates a couple more times, but prices do seem to be coming down. We likely will go into some sort of recession, probably not too deep of a recession, but we will see unemployment rise. Retailers are stuffed with goods that they'd love to get rid of, so be a savvy consumer, look for low prices, keep an eye out for deals, wait to buy a car. New car prices are falling. It seems there's some indication that that's happening very recently, but new cars, it's going to take a while. And again, consider your financial plan before you just start selling assets because you're concerned. You're getting a little spooked by the markets. And that's kind of everything I had. Let's open it up for questions as I lose my voice.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, for presenting. We do still have to have a little bit of time for questions. So if you have a question, please add it in the chat screen. Andrew, to get started, I was hoping that we could go back to that slide where you showed the trend in the federal funds rate, which essentially demonstrates the Fed's response to inflation. How much higher do you project the Fed will go with rates?
Yeah, it seems like from what I've read, a lot of analysts believe that it's going to raise a couple more times. The Fed wants to absolutely make sure that it stamps out inflation. And so they're projecting a couple more raises into 2023, but by the end of 24 or by the end of 23 or early 2024, we might even see a reduction in the Fed funds rate. And so trying to maybe spur things a little bit out of that recession that we're likely headed into. So we're not going to see it reach the Paul Volcker levels, but the Fed is taking a lot of heat. They've taken a lot of criticism for moving too slowly because the inflation was kind of obvious in 2021 to some folks, and so they will not be dovish on this. They will move on it until they stamp out the inflation.
So when the Fed is considering what to do with rates, it does consider multiple factors. Which fact do you think will weigh the most on their minds when they do decide whether to increase rates, to continue to increase, or whether it's time to decrease rates?
You know, they've got a dual mandate for inflation, price control, or not price controls, but overall inflation, and then unemployment. So they'll be watching both of those markers and trying to adjust the levers as needed. So I think you'll see them weigh both of them before they start easing the Fed funds rate. You know, it's a funny story. They look at everything, and it seems, I remember reading about Alan Greenspan. He liked to look at men's underwear and the movement of men's underwear because that's something that is really inflation resistant. And so they do look at all sorts of data points.
Great, thank you. We have an attendee question here. This individual is considering building a new home, but has been waiting given the price on things. So in your opinion, do you think the cost of goods to build a home will decline as interest rates rise?
Yeah, I think you'll see. I think if you look at lumber, lumber prices have fallen to close to pre-pandemic pricing. And so we had lumber prices just dramatically increase. And so we already have seen them kind of come back down to pre-pandemic pricing. Mills have kind of caught up. They've worked a lot of shifts, and so we're actually seeing, I believe, lumber mills start to slow down. There's been some consolidation, and so they're not being as aggressive as in getting lumber out the door because the price they can get has fallen. And so I think we'll see lumber at the retail level start to match that fall, and I think we'll see labor labor will still be expensive, but it will stop increasing as that unemployment rate kind of creeps up, as people stop expecting inflation to rise. And so, again, I think you shouldn't base your decision to build or not build based on one guy on a screen. But I think we will see prices start to mediate or fall in the near future.
Great. We have time for one more question. So as you concluded, you mentioned that a recession would be likely. How do you anticipate a recession to unfold in terms of the length and possible severity?
If you look at the US economy, we're still very strong. And especially if you look around the world, we're doing pretty well. And so I think that whatever it will be a short recession. We'll see an uptick in unemployment. That will definitely be harmful. People will be hurt by this recession. They'll lose their jobs. They'll have to find a new one. But we're not looking at the Great Recession that we had over a decade ago. It's going to be much lighter. There's still going to be places in the economy that are going to be roaring and growing. And so it's just going to be a reallocation kind of within that space.
Great. Well, thank you, Andrew, for sharing your perspective today. It was really valuable. Thanks to our audience for joining us too. You should either see a post-webinar survey load in your browser as you close Zoom, or one of those surveys will already have loaded in your browser. Please consider responding, as we'll use the results to improve the webinar experience and also brainstorm future webinar topics. You should receive a recorded copy of today's webinar via your email sometime tomorrow. Also, you can join us for our next Engaging for Missouri webinar on Wednesday, November 16th. Hoa Huang, a senior research associate who works with the Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute, will share a presentation titled Thrifty Food Plan and Cost of Different Food Market Baskets. Again, thanks for joining us, and I hope you have a great Wednesday. Thanks again, Andrew.
Thanks, everybody.